I have the pleasure of introducing a very generous member of our club, and that's Garry Brust. This evening you'll get a glimpse into the vast knowledge that Garry has amassed in his 26 years on the Peninsula. He has practical solutions for how to grow successfully vegetables on the Peninsula. But Garry's also generous because he said, I don't need that honorarium that you give to speakers. Instead, open the doors and welcome everyone here. And I'm glad to see it worked. So Garry, it's yours.
What I'm going to talk about this evening, none of this is my invention, but what I'm doing tonight is paying respect to all the people that helped me learn how to garden on the Peninsula. Many of the members that taught me what to do are no longer with us, but it's respect for what they shared with me that I want to share with you. Okay, for some of us, the 2015 garden season has started. Those people that grow garlic have probably planted it in October. And if it doesn't look like this, I might suggest that you talk to it a little bit. But also, here's what I do when I plant my garlic in October. You can have a look at this, or I can pass it around. This is called 18-18-18. It's available at Integrity. Dwight, who's going to be speaking to you next month, he has this in 25 kilogram bags. And it lasts me about 4 years. It's quite a bit cheaper than the stuff you see on the shelves. It works out to about $1 a kilogram. So I put a teaspoon of that below each clove when I plant it in October. And I don't think that's too bad, the result. Okay? It's called 18-18-18. And there's different versions of this. What you want to ask for is the agriculture grade. And it's the cheapest. Why, I don't know. But I've used this for about 20 years. And I think it works. So needless to say, I'm not an organic grower. And that doesn't mean that I don't do things to amend the soil in my garden, because that's the next thing I'm going to talk about. By the way, I want to interrupt this now. I don't want you to listen to me drone on here for the next 40 minutes. I'm going to invite every one of you to raise your hand if you have a question, or make a face to get my attention. And because it's important that whatever I'm talking about, that you understand and that you get ideas, and you might have something to contribute. And the more interest you show in whatever I'm talking about, we'll spend more time on that. Because to me, the mission here is to at least get some of you out there first thing in the morning with your boots and gloves on and start gardening. Okay? So please feel free to interrupt. There will not be a question and answer period after this. Okay, any questions about garlic? The question was about rust on garlic. And depending on the moisture conditions, I think if you're watering overhead, you're probably going to have more rust. If you can avoid overhead watering, use a drip system, or which I do, it develops a lot later. But I don't think it affects the size of the bulb very much. It doesn't look very good, but The alternative is to use sprays in anticipation of rust, and I don't really recommend that. So just try and ignore it. And it's probably helpful with rust that you don't use it in your compost, to just recycle it. Okay, any other questions about? Yes, I don't use it on peas. Don't ever put it on peas, because you're going to end up with peas 8-10 feet high and no pods. Not good. And I've done it by accident. Like I use it on corn, and with respect to corn, I have for about every 50 square feet. Okay, let me restate that. I have a bed. All my beds are 4 feet by 12 feet, so about 48. And I use a cup of this for the whole bed. Sprinkle it on top, and then just do the fork. I pick Halloween night because I can remember Halloween night. When you get my age, there are things you have to have a reference to. So Halloween night, I take each clove and put it down in about an inch under the top, about an inch of soil over, but about 2 inches below each clove, I put a teaspoon of this stuff. And when do I dig it up? When about the bottom 3 leaves are turned, drying up, turned yellow. That's when I dig it up. The important is not, you don't want to wait too long, because this cover aids in the how long your bulb will last, because if you don't have a proper cover, then you're going to get the individual cloves drying up, and so your storage is significantly reduced. Do something called vernalization. You take it out of the fridge, and then all of a sudden your green sprouts come out, and it doesn't taste good. That's why we plant in October, so to give it that cold treatment. Yes?
Is it correct to put it in a jar that can breathe, that's dark? Or does it matter if you store it?
I just keep it in the house. This has been in the house. I probably pulled this up July. Even last year, I was pulling the garlic up a lot earlier. Okay? Now, I want to talk a little bit about the soil amendments that I do that the organic gardeners here will approve of. And I have access to unlimited amount of horse manure, because across the road from me there's many horse farms, and they're happy when I come to take it away, because they've got to deal with it. So in November, I put about 2 to 3 inches of horse manure on all my beds. I just dump it with the wheelbarrow and let it sit there. And there's a past member of the garden club that told me, if it ain't steaming, it's no good. And I listened to him. So when it arrives, each wheelbarrow is steaming. And I put it on there in November, and it smells a couple days, and then it goes away. And now when I dig up my beds, all I do is irritate all those big earthworms that just love being underneath fresh manure. So they distribute the organic material, and I've done that for 25 years, and it works for me. Okay, any other questions on that? Now, if anybody wants to know about how I grow my Kelsey onions, you'll have to wait till next fall and get fresh seeds from me, because I've already started them, and I didn't bring them in, but they've got 3 leaves, and I measured them today. They're 10 inches high. So I started them just after Christmas. And I'll be happy to share seed with anyone who wants to get in on the silly game of growing the biggest onion in the world. Okay. Now, I do keep a diary every year so that I can compare what is happening from year to year, and I'm trying and improve my gardening methods. So, normally on February 15th, I'll start basil, peas, pepper, and Cape gooseberry. Cape gooseberry, yeah. And now I want to demonstrate this. I do this with every seed that I plant. And I have to say, because it's so warm this year, I cheated a bit. I've already planted my peas. But I'm betting that it's going to be warm for the rest of the year. Now, here's what I do with every seed that I plant before I put it in the garden or in a pot. Paper towel. I put the seeds in here and write on what the seed is. If you don't, you forget. And then I spray a little bit of this on the seeds. I fold it over. And I actually don't even put this in the bag because I think it needs oxygen. The seeds need oxygen to work. And I just do this. And I just put it on a table down in the basement. I do this with every single one of my seeds because most of the time when I plant them, within 48 hours, I've already got evidence of leaf growth, something coming through the surface. I did that last week with radishes. They're already up. And radishes only take a day or two to germinate. I know there's a lot of books that will say that things like beans and peas to soak them in water, straight water. I have found that doesn't work that well for me because the absorption of the moisture in the pea is so quick that it splits. Whereas if you just spray it, that's a more natural way of the seed absorbing. Now, the reason I do that is that you're not planting any seeds that aren't going to germinate because you can see what you've germinated. And every seed that you plant in the soil is going to show in the next day or two. Well, maybe 3 days. But anyway, everything's alive, so you're not wasting any time. Oh, about a half inch. Quarter to a half inch. So the question was how long the leg should be on the pea pod before I plant it. Yes, I don't think it matters. Because when you plant your seed without sprouting, you have no idea where it's going to come up. Actually, I saw a YouTube video of what does happen. And the plant has the ability to turn the seed to where it should be so that the roots go down and the other part goes up. The last 20 years, the question was, when do you put out the peas? For the last 20 years, my notes say February 15th, I start them. This year, I'm cheating because it's so warm outside. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
So what do you use for the peas to climb? Do you use a trellis? Do you use...
Good question. Perfect question. And I'm going to ask you to be my volunteer. I know you've got a strong arm. Can you just put that right there? And now I need another volunteer. Thank you. Can you just hold this down here? Okay. Dick Heapins showed me how to do this 25 years ago, and I still do it. Now, unfortunately, people here won't quite see this. Now, if you can imagine, this is my raised bed, and I've got a post here. My place, they're 6 feet high, and I've got a post here, 6 feet high, and string. So the peas are planted, and the peas come up about a foot high, and then they start to fall over. So this is what I do. Go along like this. And all those peas, I just stick them in here. And they're happy now that they've got something to cling to, so they grow up again. And then in a week or so, I go up and do the same thing, like this. Now, here's the reason this works so well, because you can keep doing it to the top of the post. But the important thing is when you're picking, and you've got a nice pea on that side, you just reach through. You don't have to go around, because if you go around the bed the other side, you'll never find it again. And so then, at the end of the season, when you're finished, it just takes a short while. You just take everything down. And it's all cleaned up. You've got nothing to store, no wire, no mesh, and the only thing that's bad is you've got to remember where you put the string next year. Thank you very much. You've been very good. I want to show you something that I also learned about 20 years ago at one of these garden club meetings. And I keep doing it. After I've sprouted my seed, and I do this for peppers and for tomatoes and Cape gooseberry. This is a 2-liter milk container, which has already been used once. When I started doing this, I used a 1-liter container, and they get very tippy. So I would knock plants over and damage them, and so I use 2-liter containers. Now this container replaces about 4 plastic pots, and I'll show you why. When I've got my peppers or my tomatoes or whatever started, I do this. Put about an inch down here, put some potting soil in. Okay. 2-liter container, it's got a hole here and a hole here for drainage. And I cut off the top. And then this is just foil. And so what I do is I put about a 2-inch drop in here, fill it with potting soil, whatever your favorite is, and plant 2 or 3 of your sprouted seeds in there. And then you watch it, and it starts growing, and when it's about 2 to 3 inches above the container, then you do this. Drop it about 2-3 inches until the leaves are just on top of the container. And add soil. And that works very well for your pepper and tomato plants because they make side shoots as the stem drops down. And now the plant is really happy. And you drop it down again until you're all the way down to the bottom. And Now you've virtually transplanted to a 2-liter container that you've recycled, and you've never disturbed the roots, because those roots are so vigorous they'll actually come out of these holes. And then when your pepper plant is about this high, and in my case I take them out of here when they start to flower, or tomatoes, the same thing, then moving it into a bigger container. And by the way, this is the size where I grow all my peppers, and this is where I grow 2 tomatoes. So anyway, you can see that this will go in there just about. So to transplant, it's a real easy exercise. You just go like this, and all you've got to see is all this white root. And of course, you've got it supported. You don't damage anything. And as I say, I use this 2 or 3 times before it has to be discarded. Yes. The question was, I start off with 2 or 3 seeds in here, and you're going to have 2 or 3 plants. So every time you lower it, I know it's like drowning your kids, but you've got to get rid of one. And so when you're down at the bottom, you only want to have 1 plant. Okay? But this works for me so well, and Sandra was I can't remember her last name, she was the one that showed us that. And it really works, and you've only got 1 container, and both the foil and the container work for about 3 seasons. So you don't do any of that transplanting. When you take this out, you're going to see very little soil. It's just going to be a mass of white root. And it's really tight, and that's what you want to see, is a lot of white root. Okay, now we're going to go to why I grow in pots. I used to grow peppers and tomatoes in my raised beds. And then 15 years ago, I again watched other gardeners, and they were going to pots. And one of the reasons was because of the tomato blight. Because you either had to cover them, and that was difficult, and going to pots, you could place them in areas where they did have a plastic cover, or you could put, in my case, when I started, I just put a plastic cover on in the spring and in the fall. But I saw one of the members' gardens, and they had a plastic on stakes that they just left wide open. But if you can keep the moisture off your tomatoes, that's the way to avoid the blight. But there's another reason I started growing tomatoes in pots, is that the ones that take longer to mature, like a 90 days brandy wine, and there's some Russian ones that I grow, that I found that I could ripen them in pots, but if I grew them in the raised bed, they wouldn't ripen. And I think it's because you can maintain a warmer soil temperature. With respect to the peppers, I was getting 5 or 6 peppers per plant in the raised beds. And I'm not exaggerating, I get 20 from 1 plant in one of these pots every year. So watering is a problem if you have to walk around with a watering can, but don't do what I did when I started growing the pots. I had back of my property, I had some pots. In the front, I had some pots. The side, I had some pots. And I put on 1,000,000 miles with a watering can. I use, for watering the pots now, I use a battery-operated watering system that waters every pot 4 times a day. The small one is a 12-liter pot, and this one, the larger, the green one, is 25 liters. Good question. The question was, what do I put in the pots? I use a sunshine mix And I use number 2. There's 1 to 5. I learned there was 5 yesterday. But number 1 has some fertilizer in it that starts your plants. And since I add my own fertilizer, I take number 2, which has no fertilizer in it, but it's the same thing. And what that sunshine mix is 80% peat moss and 20% perlite, which the white beads. And that's what I grow everything in those pots. And that's the material. And I recycle it. Some people might not want to do that, but I didn't want to demonstrate it here tonight. I actually wash the soil in a mesh that's about the size of a quarter-inch nylon mesh, and I wash it until the soil comes clean. And I do reuse it. And I've been reusing it for the last 15 years. But there's nothing wrong with, after a couple of years, taking it and just adding it to your raised beds, because it's perlite and peat moss. I use Osmocote. Osmocote, and I don't know what it is. They changed the formula. I think it's about 14, 14, 14. And it takes 6 months. It provides 6 months of nutrients to the pot. And I actually have, and that's 3 grams per liter. The worst thing that we do when we use commercial fertilizers in these pots is that they're gone. Is to over-fertilize, because we read the label on the fertilizer, and it's really generally intended for use in open area. When you put it in a confined area like that, you'll overdo it. And a good example of overdoing fertilizer is, if any of you saw the picture of me on the tomato ladder, those tomatoes had far too many leaves. We want to see more fruit. So when you're growing any of these things, tomatoes, peppers, you want fruit production. You don't want a lot of green growth. So if you have big leaves, huge plants, and no fruit, you've over-fertilized. I like to use what is now referred to as heritage tomatoes. A lot of them have, I think, a superior flavor, and you can keep the seeds. So you don't have to go and try and find seed packages. Not all of them are open pollen, but here's what I grow. Sun Gold is my favorite cherry tomato. It is a hybrid, so you have to buy seeds. But there's another one called Galena that originally came from Siberia. It's very good. Gardener's Delight, you could keep the seeds from that. And for the slicers, the beef, I use Big Beef, which is a hybrid. You can't keep the seeds from that. But there's one called Radiator Charlie, Mortgage Lifter. And it's interesting just to read the history on it. But that's one of Evelyn's favorites for slicer, and you can keep the seeds. With respect to, while we're on this, what I like is peppers. I only grow sweet peppers now because I can't take the heat anymore. And good ones are Gypsy and Super Shepherd. It's a very large, sweet, juicy pepper. I'm sorry? Gypsy, and the other one, Super Shepherd. And Gypsy is a hybrid. You can't keep the seeds, but Super Shepherd, you can keep the seeds. And back to the peas, Cascadia is my favorite snap pea because it doesn't matter how big it gets, it never gets stringy. And I still grow Green Arrow, and it's been around for 100 years. Any other questions? I don't worry about pollination. When the flowers come out, I think there might be some. I don't see very many bees around anymore, but I do grow peppers in the greenhouse, and I don't go around hand pollinating them. But there is cross-pollination if you have a hot pepper in the greenhouse, because I've learned that what was my usual sweet one, so one will be sweet and the next one won't be. So I don't grow the hot ones anymore. Any other questions? We're done. Thank you very much.